Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you for being here with us tonight. My name is Paige and I work at Right to the City Alliance, and I'm really excited to be here with you. Just before we jump in, I'm gonna do a couple of housekeeping announcements. First one is that we do have a practice of language justice in this space, and if there are any Spanish speakers on the line, you can dial into the interpretation line. The number is right here on the screen, and it's also in the chat. You will have to call in and put yourself on mute if you are not speaking. We're using the webinar function tonight, so you won't, if you're attending, you won't be able to share your video or your audio, but on the Spanish line, you are able to share your audio, so please do mute so that the interpreters can hear us. So just some tech tips to get the most out of our time together. We recommend using a headset for audio, if possible, or calling in if you have an unsteady connection. While we can't see you, we do want to hear from you by using the chat box. So you can click on chat in your menu toolbar and join the conversation. And if folks can go ahead and practice using the chat by introducing yourselves, you can share your name and where you're coming from and why you're here. So I'm going to give a little bit of framing about what it is that we're here to do. So this call is being sponsored by Right to the City Alliance. Right to the City Alliance emerged in 2007 as a national alliance, membership-led grassroots groups who are fighting for the rights, the collective right of poor and working people to define their own living conditions in a way that addresses their needs and the needs of the planet. Since 2013, Right to the City has been involved in an initiative called Homes for All. We started this because you know, we were noticing what was happening around our cities and gentrification and displacement. And so Right to the City groups in partnership with other member organizations who are fighting to win permanent, dignified and affordable homes for everybody, where residents have democratic control over their communities, came together, and now we have almost 90 organizations across the country in 45 cities and half of the states, and we're growing every day. And Homes for All and Right to the City together, we know that we can't win housing justice or land justice until we transform our social and economic systems, and unless we win racial, gender, and economic justice for everybody. So building the power of who we call the renter nation must be part of a broader strategy for building power to bring about a just transition to a world for the people and the planet over profit, hate, and bigotry. And then in light of the COVID-19 moment, Homes for All and Right to the City launched a new initiative called Beyond Recovery, through which we are calling for a debt-free future and a systemic answer to the crisis. And you can check out the demands more in detail of the Beyond Recovery campaign at cancelrent.us. And you can sign on to support the demands there. And you can also join our national campaign calls, which happen every other Wednesday. And so the next one will be on June 17th. And then this is episode 4 of the Renter Nation training series as part of the Beyond Recovery initiative. And this is our agenda for today. This year's Renter Nation training series is working to facilitate the political education and the organizing skills of people who have been impacted by this moment. to deepen our collective capacity to build intersectional multi-issue movements, to build the strategy and the power that we need to cancel rent and win transformative change. And today's call is called The Great Land Robbery, Land and Housing Under Racial Capitalism. And it will focus on how race structures our relationship to land and access to housing. So you can check out the rest of the series topics on our social media or on the same registration link that you used to join today, and come nerd out with us every Friday until the last session on June 19th. And I'm gonna right now let our presenters who are here with us tonight just introduce themselves briefly. Again, my name is Paige. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I work at Right to the City, and I live in Brooklyn, Lenape territory. And I'm gonna pass it over to my co-facilitator, Lisa.
Hey, good evening, everybody. My name is Lisa. I work at City Life Vida Urbana in Boston, and I'm on the steering committee of Right to the City. And I'll pass it to Benishi.
Got to take myself off mute, sorry. Good evening, everyone. My name is Benishi Albert. I'm Yuchi and Anishinaabe. I am calling from Wewoka, Oklahoma, which used to be known as Indian Territory. And before that, before forced removal of lots of Indians to come here, it was the homeland of Kiowa Comanche people. And I work with the Indigenous Environmental Network, she, her.
Saki, wanna go?
Yeah, hey everybody, peace. My full name is Saka Jawia Hall. Everybody calls me Saki. I'm in Jackson, Mississippi, use pronouns she, her, hers, and I am with Cooperation Jackson. When I'm speaking, you may hear little people being loud in the background, despite trying to tell them consistently to keep it down. It doesn't usually work, so.
Love to the little people. Thank you all for being here tonight. And thanks everybody for introducing yourselves in the chat. I see folks from Madison, Wisconsin, LA, Hayward, Minneapolis, Brooklyn, Seattle, Durham, Philly, San Jose, Ohlone Territory, San Francisco, lots of California folks in the house. I see y'all. Thanks for being here. Rochester's in the house. Hey, Liz. Let's see who else is here. Portland, Oregon's in the house. San Jose, Sonoma County, Philly. Ooh, Virginia's here. Atlanta. All right, we are coast to coast tonight. Really glad you all could make it. Just really quickly, I want to launch a quick poll to see how you all heard about our call tonight, if I can get my computer to cooperate. So I'm going to launch a quick poll. Just how did you hear about this training series? Just so we know if our outreach is working and where we need to strengthen it. And I'm going to launch it. Cool, people are voting. About half of us have voted. About 3/4. Cool, just a couple more seconds. I'm gonna end the poll. And share. All right, so you are reading our emails. Great. And some of you are catching us on social media, and some of you are hearing from other organizations or other folks. So that's great. Please do keep passing the word along about the series. There's 2 more sessions after tonight. And even if you aren't able to make the session, you can still register and get the recording afterwards. So please do spread the word. Alrighty, so I am going to start our call tonight with something that we do every week called Culture as a Weapon. And We believe culture can be a weapon against oppression, against suffering, against ignorance, against hatred, against isolation, against fear, because culture nourishes us, right? It's food for us. It's food for our body and our mind and our soul. And it fortifies us for the struggle ahead, creates connection, right? And culture also helps us make meaning of our world, of our experience, of our lives. Culture has power, and we think that that power should be used for our liberation, right? And not against us. So before we get into today's cultural content, I just want to acknowledge the moment that we are in. We are living through a global pandemic, mass uprising, and state repression. The message that we've been talking about throughout this series, that capitalism values property over people, is being put on explicit display, right? As the corporate media continue to put blame on protesters for the violence and obscure the reason why there's protesters in the first place, it's incredibly important for us to understand what is at the root of all of this. How did we arrive at this moment? In this session, we are going to look at the roots of racism in the United States. And I want to recognize that a lot of us are carrying a lot of grief. And my hope is that this cultural offering can serve as a sort of balm. This is one of my favorite poems. It's called Bocas, A Daughter's Geography by Ntozake Shange. So I'm just going to read it. I have a daughter, Mozambique. I have a son, Angola. Our twins, Salvador and Johannesburg, cannot speak the same language, but we fight the same old men in the new world. We are so hungry for the morning. We're trying to feed our children the sun. But a long time ago, we boarded ships, locked in depths of seas our spirits, kissed the earth on the Atlantic side of Nicaragua, Costa Rica. Our lips trace the edges of Cuba, Puerto Rico, Charleston, and Savannah. In Haiti, we embraced and made children of the new world. But old men spit on us, shackled our limbs. But for a minute, our cries are the Panama Canal, the Yucatan. We poured through more sea, more ships to Manila. Aha, we're back again. Everybody in Manila already speaks Spanish. The old men sent for the Archbishop of Canterbury. Can whole continents be excommunicated? What would happen to the children? Would their allegiance slip over the edge? Don't worry about Lumumba. Don't even think about Ho Chi Minh. The dead can't procreate. So say the old men. But I have a daughter, La Habana. I have a son, Guyana. Our twins, Santiago and Brixton, cannot speak the same language, yet we fight the same old men. The ones who think helicopters rhyme with hunger, who think patrol boats can confiscate a people, the ones whose dreams are full of none of our children. They see Mae West and Harlow in whittled white cafes. Near Managua, listening to primitive rhythms in jungles near Pétionville with bejeweled benign natives, ice skating in Abidjan. Unaware of the rest of us in Chicago, all the dark urchins rounding out the globe, primitively whispering, the earth is not flat, old men. There is no edge, no end to the new world. Because I have a daughter, Trinidad. I have a son, San Juan. Our twins, Cape Town and Palestine, cannot speak the same language, but we fight the same old men. The same men who thought the earth was flat. Go on over the edge. Go on over the edge, old men. You'll see us in Luanda, for the rest of us in Chicago, rounding out the morning. We are feeding our children the sun. So thank you for letting me share that poem by Ntozake Shange. I'd like to just take a minute to process what we heard and just engage in the chat. 1 or 2 words about what you noticed or what you felt upon hearing the poem. Oh, and I forgot to say, while you're using the chat, you want to click on the drop down and select all panelists and attendees so everybody can see your response. So what came up for you? 1 or 2 words. Beautiful and powerful. Cannot speak the same language, but fight the same old men. Mourning language. Oppression, how we are all connected by histories of colonialism and imperialism. Yes, go off the edge. Real history. Please, please take your ass over the edge. So much pride in homelands. Constant change. The answer is ourselves, not others. Yeah, thank you all for sharing. Ntozake Shange's poem here, for me, it speaks to the sorrow, but also the resiliency of oppressed peoples, right? In the face of all of the attempts, all that attempts to keep us oppressed. The world has been profoundly shaped by a history of violence and domination, and generally darker skinned peoples are targets, victims, and survivors of such violence. Today, we are going to get deeper into how this works by exploring racial capitalism. So I just want to do a quick review. I'm going to share my screen again. Of actually, first I want to hear from y'all. And there's a slide. I'm going to, Samir, if you could drop the link to the slides in the chat. I'm actually going to ask everybody to open up the slides. And you're gonna go to this slide that has the Post-its on it. I don't know what number it is. And let's just take 30 seconds and you're gonna grab a Post-it on the slide. And since we're talking about racial capitalism, I'd like to hear your thoughts. How would you define racial capitalism? What does that mean to you? What does that bring up for you? What is racial capitalism? Are folks able to get into the slides? I'm gonna stop my share, see. Slide 22. Oh, yep, I see people in there. Okay, I'm just gonna play a quick song while y'all are writing.
I wear garments touched by hands from all over the world. 35% cotton, 65% polyester. The journey begins in Central America in the cotton fields of El Salvador. In a province soaked in blood, pesticide-sprayed workers toil in a broiling sun, pulling cotton for $2 a day. Then we move on up to another rung, Cargill. A top 40 trading conglomerate takes the cotton through the Panama Canal, up the eastern seaboard, coming to the US of A for the first time. In South Carolina, at the Burlington Mills, joins a shipment of polyester filament courtesy of the New Jersey petrochemical mills of DuPont. DuPont strands of filament begins in the South American country of Venezuela, where oil riggers bring up oil from the earth for $6 a day. Then Exxon, largest oil company in the world, upgrades the product in the country of Trinidad and Tobago, then back into the Caribbean and Atlantic seas to the factories of DuPont, on the way to the Burlington mills in South Carolina to meet the cotton from the blood-soaked fields of El Salvador. In South Carolina, Burlington factories hum with the business of weaving oil and cotton into miles of fabric for Sears, who takes his bounty back into the Caribbean Sea.
All right, let's see what folks shared. Okay, I see white supremacy, organized extraction of skin color, the criminalization of race, poverty, houselessness, power and wealth controlled and maintained by white people, extraction and creation of wealth co-created with logics of white supremacy, inclusive message, racist, oppressive practice, unjust policies, colorism, segregated the communities for the benefit of big companies, gaining financial supremacy from the racial identity of others. These are great. Thanks so much for contributing. The thing about racial capitalism is that it is something that we all experience every day in the United States, right? We know it, we see it play out, we are impacted by it, and we have ways that we navigate it. And our experiences within it are largely negative, right? Just definitely in a material sense for the working class, because most of us are broke. And usually with accompanying negative mental and emotional experiences for everybody involved, right? So we're saying, let's get rid of it. Let's replace racial capitalism with a system that works for all of us, right? And so in order to do that, to replace racial capitalism, we must understand how to dismantle it. And that begins with understanding what it is and how it works. Last week's section covered some fundamental elements of capitalism, which we're going to review just to help us understand racial capitalism. So the key concepts last week were around original accumulation, that land had been forcibly taken by the US state. Capitalism turns basic human needs into products to be bought or sold, or commodities. It also emphasizes private ownership of the means of production, including land. And the capitalist class obtained that land through coercion and thievery, the original accumulation. So I'm going to pass it over to Lisa, and she is going to help us explore what racial capitalism is.
Thanks, Paige. So what is racial capitalism? So racial capitalism is a process of wealth hoarding dominated by large-scale corporations run by a small circle of people who have benefited from a racist societal structure. Racial capitalism was developed through racial feudalism, settler colonialism, chattel slavery, and imperialism. It organized the class structure and exploited the working class along racial lines. Racial capitalism bases itself on notions of male domination and private property. So we see here a man's ownership, quote unquote, of his wife, his children, and the land. Racial capitalism relies on competition, on violence and exploitation, which is the historical legacy of colonization and slavery. This shapes a society that normalizes rivalries between groups and individuals, where some deserve rights and prosperity, while others don't. So racial capitalism is a concept first used by South African intellectuals to describe apartheid, and then further developed by a Black Marxist intellectual, Cedric Robinson, as a critique of the traditional Marxist analysis of class. His book, Black Marxism, the Making of the Black Radical Tradition, takes Karl Marx to task for basically forgetting that other continents exist in the world. He disagrees with the idea that Marx's categories of class can be universally applied outside of Europe. Instead, he characterized Black rebellions as expressions of what he called the Black radical tradition. Marxism failed to account for the racial character of capitalism. And Robinson's basic argument is that capitalism emerged within the feudal order in Europe, which was already racialized. The first European proletarians, the working class, were racial subjects: Irish people, Jewish people, the Roma, Slavic people, etc., and themselves were victims of dispossession, colonialism, and slavery within Europe. So there's no separation of racism from capitalism, since they were cultivated together. Okay, so there are a couple of other terms that we need to define in order to help us understand racial capitalism. So first, we're going to talk about white supremacism or white supremacy. This is a political ideology that perpetuates and maintains the social, political, historical, and institutional domination by white people. White supremacy has its roots in the racist belief that race is a biological category and that white people are superior to people of other races, quote unquote, and therefore should be dominant over them. White supremacy is evidenced by historical and contemporary social political structures, such as the Atlantic slave trade, Jim Crow laws in the US, the set of white Australia policies from the 1890s to the mid-1970s, and apartheid in South Africa. Different forms of white supremacy put forth different conceptions of who is considered white, and different groups of white supremacists over time identify various racial or cultural groups as their primary enemy. So the next concept we're going to talk about is anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness is the name for the specific kind of racial prejudice directed towards Black people. The first form of anti-Blackness that we'll talk about is overt racism, or racism that is explicit and easily recognizable. Beneath this anti-Black racism is the covert or unseen structural and systemic racism, which determines the status of Black people in this country. The structure is held in place by anti-Black policies, institutions, and ideologies. The second form of anti-Blackness is the utter disregard for Black people, who are the people who feel the impact of anti-Black institutions and policies the most. This disregard is the product of class, race, and or gender privilege that certain individuals experience due to anti-Black institutions and policies. So now that we've defined racial capitalism, I'd like for you to put in the chat, why do you think it's important to understand white supremacy and anti-Blackness? Let's see what we see in the chat. Why is it important for us to understand white supremacy and anti-Blackness? All right, so we've got some questions. What is dismantled white supremacy? What does it look like? How does equity play a role to dismantle it? Perfect. It's important to recognize it, to call it out, to do better. We can't understand the US without understanding how race and class are completely intertwined, absolutely. We have to understand it so we can dismantle it, absolutely. It is deep programming, and we need to throw it out of our heads and our hearts. And we have to see the violence. Absolutely. White supremacy is a beast. A dying beast is a dangerous beast. Hallelujah. We have to be able to name it. That's right. To abolish racism, white people need to be on the front lines and be willing to let go of the systems that benefit them so that we can all be free. These are great responses. These are great responses. So if we're going to understand how racial capitalism works, we have to understand the underlying doctrine of white supremacy. Anti-Blackness is the foundation of white supremacy. White and Black people are supposedly opposites in this crazy ideology. White people are considered advanced, Black people are considered backwards. The closer you are to whiteness, the more privilege and material benefit you're able to reap from capitalism. So it's super important that we're able to name it, as you said, in order for us to dismantle it. Awesome. So I'm going to pass it over to Benishi now.
Sorry, I was
So
trying to.
Benishi, okay. That's totally.
So I am going to talk a little bit about original accumulation, and this is a concept that is built around the original sort of expansion, empire building, colonization that many Europeans sort of put into place, and in that. And in that white supremacy formed the development of slavery and the accumulation of land of indigenous peoples, and they did that in building their empires, and they were given that in a number of different ways from their government, but it had nothing to do with the people that they encountered. They saw both Africans and indigenous people they encountered as in this hemisphere as less than human, soulless, and were given authority through like the doctrine of discovery and the papal bulls that gave them authority to like claim the land and claim the people as property. And so that led to, the original sort of accumulation of land in this, that stretched through Asia, Africa, this hemisphere of South America, Central America, North America. And then it used slaves from Africa, stole them from their homeland to bring them here to this hemisphere to work the land and to be the labor. And so that original accumulation that was talked about last week in the last week's presentation was around the massive theft of indigenous territory by European capitalists. European being most of the countries were Spanish, French, British. They all came and had their hands in the pie here and here in this country in the United States, and it led to this idea that like people came here and settled here, they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and they built the country that was here, even though they stole that country by viewing the indigenous peoples they encountered as less than human. And so there's a slide here that shows how the United States was able to, in just 100 years, really take the land from indigenous peoples. And, we always think about, that it was 500 years from when Columbus came, but in the United States, that land loss happened in a short 100 years of time. And you know, the Eastern Seaboard was where the original colonies were and indigenous peoples. And this is where you started to see the original displacement of people, both wiping them out, wiping out their access to land, and then removing them from that land to smaller and smaller tracts of land. Much of the eastern tribes were moved to Oklahoma, and many of the other tribal communities. And so, you know, the United States built they built this country of the United States of America based on racial capitalism, that they capitalized not only on the land, but on the lives of the people that they encountered and the lives of African slaves that they brought here to build the society that we have today. And so, you know, it's not that it was like we pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps and like built this country. There, like they did it based on taking lives and using the resource of lives. And and so that hierarchy exists and continues to exist in today's society, and particularly around access to public lands. So all of these little red dots here are you seeing are tribally held lands that are still there, but then there are still many people who have claim to some of the public lands. And in this current administration, we're seeing those public lands being opened up, and not opened up for people or for public, but being opened up for corporate access to access the resources. So initially the land grab was around empire building. All these countries claimed land to build their empires, and then they claimed the resources of those lands. They claimed the people of those lands. And right now we're still dealing with, now they want the resources that are under the land, the minerals, the fossil fuels, that they're now wanting the resources under those lands. So those lands now that are held in public for all of us are being opened up for corporate use, not for people's use, not for, you know, land that people want to live in or settle or be held for us as natural open space or hunting space or farming space. It's being opened up for corporations to use. And so, you know, these are some of the reasons why, you know, we think about the loss of land, not only in this country, but of the Americas. Like we lost billions and billions of land, and it was claimed by other folks. And now people are still struggling, not only here in the United States, but in Mexico and Central America and in South America are still struggling, not only for just recognition of like, guys, we're original peoples from here, but also recognizing that we live here and our land is here and this is our land, and they're often being, you know, fighting against corporate farmers or other corporations. And so I just wanted to say also that just in terms of the United States specifically, even though there are tribal lands, there were laws that were enforced by the courts in the early colonial times that left Indian people without being able to own title to the lands. That tribal lands are basically held in trust from the federal government. And many of the tribes now are really pushing more and more for, you know, holding that land as their own and pushing what it means to be sovereign and hold that land in sovereign relationship as independent nations. But many of the laws that govern a land now still make it that the tribes don't, that the land is held for them, but held as wards of the federal government. And prohibited for many, many years, that prohibited Indian people from owning title to land. And so some of those things are still happening today, where there's land grabs happening, and particularly even now with unrecognizing tribal nations so that they can claim and grab land. The most recent is the Mashpee Wampanoag people, and, you know, unrecognizing them as indigenous people because somebody like Trump, even in his business days, you know, referred to them as they didn't look Indian. So we shouldn't recognize them anymore because they didn't look Indian. But really, the push, you know, there's many reasons behind the push to unrecognize them, but one of the most immediate ones is to grab the land that they hold in trust for them as a nation, as a tribal nation. And so that's a threat to all of us, and not just to their sovereignty, but to their survival as a people. And so even though, like, you know, the Americans like to say, oh, you know, we have this, like, built this relationship of brotherhood with Indian people in this country. It was a system set up to not put us on the same equal footing as European colonial settlers. And it still exists. Many of the laws that exist in relation to indigenous peoples in this country put us on not equal footing around owning land. And so that's the short that I could give for that right now.
Thank you so much, Benishi. Really appreciate you sharing all of that and, you know, helping us to understand the ongoing impact of settler colonialism on indigenous peoples, right? And I just want to give a moment to this map here, just because it's like pretty overwhelming, you know, when you think about it and when you actually see it laid out here, that the United States was able to conquer an eighth of the world, right, through this conquest of land, of this landmass. Yeah, and so I'm just, maybe we can just take a couple of seconds for people to take what that means in, you know.
And just a short piece about this territory I'm in right now. Oklahoma at one point was supposed to be one giant reservation called Indian Territory, where they took people from the southeast and many of the places in the north too, in the Ohio Valley area and the Great Lakes area, and moved them to Oklahoma so that they can remove them from their original homelands into a place that they said they would keep forever. So you see at one point it's largely red. And then even that became a system of allotment that they gave to people, individuals, and then exploited and manipulated by taking that land from original allotment titles to, like, settlers, like, buying up that land and swindling people to take that land.
Mm-hmm.
So now there's just a tiny piece, even though there's like 39 tribes here in Oklahoma.
Wow. And yeah, that kind of fuckery, excuse my language, has been going on since the inception of this country, right? And we know that, you know, there were no Google Maps back then, and the sort of the imprecision with which people were making claims on the land was like another way to trick people into giving away or like making concessions, you know, and then largely it was violent, right? It was actual violence and actual massacre, genocide of people, right? And I think it's important to understand how the federal government, yeah, like twists and turns all of these laws to rob people of what is rightfully theirs, right? Like a lot of this land was taken through executive order, and like the president can just, you know, the government can just confiscate land and property. And you know, in America, private property is like sacred, right? You're supposed to own your own home and, you know, have the white picket fence, and, you know, you can shoot anybody that comes on your land or whatever. But white Americans building this empire never set indigenous land title on the same footing, right, as their own. So they didn't even realize that was ironic, apparently.
Absolutely ironic.
Yeah, so speaking of land robbery, thievery, I'm gonna pass it over to Saki, and we're gonna talk about the impact of this kind of violence on Black people.
Yeah, and I mean, I think someone said it earlier, just the idea that like there's a constant, under capitalism, there's a constant accumulation. And we see the theft and the robbery of land over and over and over again. And so even when you think about now with public land and the need for us to uplift how the country started, how this empire started, and this theft is really important as we wage our struggles and our fights now for at least being able to hold on to the public land that exists, and even having public and private land start shifting over into the stewardship of communities. And so to start off with, I wanted to ask folks who are on the call, how many of you have heard of 40 Acres and a Mule, and what does that refer to? What do you know about 40 Acres and a Mule? I actually have to look. Are people familiar with this idea or the term 40 Acres and a Mule? Reparations, the reparations promised to enslaved people. Okay. What we were owed. Someone put, yes, the promise, quote unquote, given to folks after the Civil War, that was land to be apportioned to the freed slaves. That's right. Black people who worked this land under horrible conditions, terror, violence for generations, built this country's wealth, right? And so, and we were never compensated, their descendants were never compensated, even though the federal government did promise enslaved Africans who were no longer enslaved 40 acres and a mule as restitution. And so even though the pro-slavery forces lost the Civil War, the white capitalist class in the 1870s defeated Reconstruction. And not to say that Reconstruction was an end to white supremacy in this country, right? At the same time, white supremacy was reorganized. And a lot of that reorganization ended up being just as violent as the conditions that Black people, the African people in this country experienced during slavery. And so this took place, what this looked like in different places was that in the South, there was Jim Crow. In the Plains area, there's Manifest Destiny. And in the West, it looked like Asian exclusion. And so, you know, even though there are really important differences between how capitalism, white supremacy, I'm going to throw in heteropatriarchy that intersects with capitalism, even though there's important differences in how it manifested and was practiced against different peoples and nations in the United States. So it's important differences, but at the same time, Black, Tejano, Chinese, indigenous people all found themselves under attack, or even under increased attack, I would say, at the direction of the society's ruling class. And so taken together, these efforts consolidated the United States as both a continental empire and a predominantly capitalist economy. And then I would say that it also increased the United States' ability to then be able to go beyond the shores of the borders of this country internationally, right? And so the ruling class understands that owning land means being able to hold on to this empire. And the system that they set up from the very beginning is designed to discourage threats, to limit threats to the empire. So when we were talking about and wanting to draw a connection to stolen land for Africans in this country, we want to talk about farmers in this country. And so last year, The Atlantic published a piece about how Black farmers who were able to, despite all of the challenges, despite a lack of resources, were able to acquire land and farm for their families and their community, had their land stolen and were systematically robbed by the United States of their land. We're going to show a video that talks about this robbery.
Financial inequality in this country, economists often point to the absence of African-American generational wealth as one principal factor. It's resources passed from parent to child. As John Yang reports, for many African-Americans, one source of the problem goes back decades.
Over the past century, African Americans have lost millions of acres of farms they owned across the South. It's a trend propelled not just by economic forces, but by white racism and local white political and economic power. It's not just a legacy of the Jim Crow South either. Most of the losses have occurred since the 1950s. That history and its lasting effects are the subjects of the cover story of the September issue of The Atlantic magazine. It's written by Vann Newkirk, who's a staff writer at the magazine. Vann, thanks for joining us tonight. What is important about this story? Why did you want to tell this story, and what is important you think that people should know from it?
Well, right now the country is in the middle of a lot of debates over the racial wealth gap, over the status and economic prosperity or lack thereof of African Americans here, and also about reparations, perhaps. And I wanted to, with this piece, recenter the conversation on the South, on Black folks in the South who often get left out of this conversation, on one of the places where the deficit has been the most extreme, and that's in farming and in the ownership of land.
You call this, or the headline is The Great Land Robbery. What happened? Give us an idea of what happened.
So what happened was during pretty much after the middle of the 20th century, federally funded farm programs, they were put out there to give small and middle-sized farmers loans, to support farms, to keep them going through bad economic times. They systematically disenfranchised and also discriminated against Black farmers. So they didn't get the loan amounts, they were denied loans that they were entitled to, and often these local USDA programs were used as bully pulpits or forces to actually push Black farmers off their land.
And some of this was actually accelerated or exacerbated as a result of the civil rights movement, that this was a reaction to the civil rights movement.
Right. So most of the USDA funding was actually leveraged through locally elected boards. And guess who couldn't? Not vote in the South. So what would happen is these boards were dominated by the segregationists. And if you were a black farmer who needed money to grow your crops next year, one of the ways they could ensure you never joined the NAACP or never went out to vote or march against segregation was to hold that money in their hand and say, you're not getting this money unless you toe the company line. And so what they did to Black farmers who didn't do that, who did go out and join the NAACP and these organizations, they took their money from them.
And you also talk about the lasting effects of this, not only the loss of sort of family wealth, but also the political effects.
Right. Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, these were states that were, if they weren't majority Black going into the Great Depression and beyond, were close to being about half Black. And what prompted the Great Migration, quote unquote, that saw millions of Black people leave the South was the fact that a lot of them had had their land stolen. Maybe, and I think this is probably what happens if they hold on to that land, if they're able to make money in the South and vote in the South and have some type of stake in the future of their kids living in the South, perhaps those 3 states at least stay majority black. What happens into the Electoral College if we have 3 majority black states? What happens to the Senate? Yeah, those are big questions.
You told this story in part through a woman in her 60s now. She's the 3rd generation of her family to be working the same farmland. The family was able to hold on to this land. Her name is Walena Scott White. And let's take a listen to a little bit of what she told you.
It's dear to me that my children know what my ancestors went through for us to be where we are and who we are. Because I'm a firm believer that if we don't know our history, then we repeat the mistakes over and over again.
Knowing your history, she says that families were denied their history by having their farmland taken away. Talk about that and the other effects of this, the impact it has on families.
Well, I talked to dozens of farm families for this story, and the reason why Walena's particular story and character got to me is because she's a historian. This is in her bones. She wants to build a museum in the Delta to honor not just her father and grandfather, but all the other farmers who came before her. I think she embodies the idea that what we're talking about here is not just money, not just the access to land, but the ability to put down cultural roots, to have a place to call your own. That's history, right? That's a thing that I do not believe we quite understand. It's lost when people are forced to move, when they are denied the ability to own the land under their feet. They are denied a bit of their history. These people who live in the Delta now, black folks who live in the Delta now, they are in this place that was built with their hands and work that they are a part of, but not allowed to actually hold any part of.
You also talk in your story about how a lot of this land, through various transactions, is now held by pension funds, by venture capitalists, by hedge funds. You seem to hint that you think these transactions were somehow unethical?
I believe that it's possible through totally ethical means at this point, so many decades away from the original theft, to receive the land legitimately. You know, if you buy it from somebody who owned it and they don't have the lineage of the land, they don't know where it came from, that's a legal purchase. What I try to make the point of in the piece is that it probably doesn't matter whether an individual company got its land portfolio in a place where predominantly black folks lived and worked and should own the land. It doesn't really matter if they got it individual plots of land ethically or legally. What matters is that at some point, the land was taken unethically and was taken away from these black folks illegally. What is our legal, ethical, moral responsibility as a people to rectify that?
Well, I mean, let me ask that. You talked about reparations earlier. How should we be thinking about rectifying this?
I do not believe the current reparations debate, in its well-meaning and well-intended effort to try and quantify every single thing that was done to black people since slavery, that's an amazing effort. And I believe over the last 5 to 10 years, there have been people doing work that folks have not been able to approach in 150 years on quantifying in terms of a dollar amount. I think that approach, though, has lost the focus on land and land ownership and collective land ownership in some ways, and the sentimental and cultural and generational meaning of attachment to a place and having mobility be by choice instead of by being forced out. I think that's a dimension that should be added back to this conversation. Is the original promise of reparations was a land grant. It was 40 acres and a mule. People didn't love it because it had certain monetary value. They loved it because it gave them a place to call home forever. Gave them something to give to their children, not just money, but a sense of belonging, a place they can put their name on. And that's, I do believe the current reparations debate is missing a little bit of that.
Vann Newkirk, its cover story, The Great Land Robbery, in the September issue of The Atlantic. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paige. I had read the Atlantic article, but I didn't see, I'm seeing that video in the news report for the first time. I think it's important to share. So I want to be able to get that link and share it. You know, I think, so there's two things that I wanted to say really quickly, that this highlights farmers and farmland being taken, and just like huge amounts of land. And at the same time, there were towns and people's homes that they were able to acquire, that also through violence and terror and, you know, some made up story about a Black man and a white woman ended up pushing people out, Black people out, and basically like stealing that land also, right? And then I want to uplift something that happened. The Federation of Southern Cooperatives Land Assistance Fund, I mean, it took years and years and years, but the Federation of Southern Cooperatives and Land Assistance Fund, through a lawsuit, was able to get restitution back to a lot of Black farmers and landowners, including the folks in Albany, Georgia, that were the first community land trust here in the US. And so I wanted to be able to uplift that story, and folks can look into that more. So given what we've been talking about and learning about Indigenous land and Black land theft in the US, what could reparations, and many people use the word reparations when I asked about 40 acres and a mule, what could reparations around land and housing look like? So we're gonna take a little bit of time and use slides again, right, Paige, for folks to be able to share your ideas on the slide about what reparations, particularly around land and housing, could look like.
Far from the Port-au-Prince Palace, third world women toil doing piecework to see specifications for $3 a day. My sisters make my blouse. It leaves the third world for the last time, coming back into the sea to be sealed in plastic for me, this third world sister. And I go to the Sears department store where I buy my blouse, on sale for 20% discount. On my hands clean.
Paige, I might need help. Oh, okay. I was gonna say, I might need help being able to see slide 42 and the answers in it.
Can you see Saki?
So we have some responses for folks. Public housing, community ownership, and land trust. In the San Francisco Bay Area, we could allow those families denied. I don't see the rest of what that
Sorry,
is
they were
saying.
probably still writing. Let me refresh.
Okay.
It says denied housing at 1950 prices.
Okay, reduced prices for being able to purchase housing. I saw quite a few things that talked about collective ownership, and I like to say stewardship. Okay. So I'm gonna wrap this part up. One of the, I don't see the slide anymore.
Sorry, it's coming.
We can, maybe it can stay up and folks can look at each other's responses. Will I say last few words. More than one person put public housing, community tenant-owned housing. So I mean, like we've been talking about, this country clearly has a long and complicated history around land and housing and race, right? But reparations for people who have suffered to make this country the wealthy country that it is, and being able to have some kind of restitution and reparations is actually possible. And making it a reality really depends on a collective commitment to justice and liberation, and being able to be in solidarity with communities that are trying to either uphold their sovereignty or really be able to achieve self-determination. So I'm gonna pass it back to Paige and Lisa for the next section. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks. Thanks, Saki. And yeah, thanks, Saki, and thanks to everybody who did all of the background labor to put this together. It's been really beautiful to see pieces of my history and likely the history of many people on this call reflected. Yeah, it's very beautiful. So yeah, so we've been talking about a lot in just a short amount of time. We've been talking about the genocide and land theft of indigenous peoples. We've been talking about the looting of their land. We've been talking about the role of slavery in building this country, and the land theft of black folks, and particularly black farmers. And we've been and we know that this land grabbing continues to this day. So we're going to talk a little bit about gentrification and displacement. So it's important to talk about displacement when we use the term gentrification, because it highlights this history of forced migration that we've been learning about, specifically in the African American historical experience. So gentrification is a profit-driven race and class remake of a community based on the history of neglect and abandonment. This process happens with the support of the government, so it's institutional, it's systemic, legal, and results in skyrocketing property values and housing costs, as well as the displacement of working class communities of color. So gentrification, I guess you can think of it as colonization 2.0. So the ruling class and the corporate elite, with the consent of and in partnership with the state, demonize the inner city, disinvest the ideological, cultural messages that we hear about the places that we as Black people have been pushed into. Those messages are crime-ridden, blighted. You know, we talk about, we've heard about low property values, right? It's not a good investment. But we don't actually learn about the systemic, about the very intentional policy that was created to create that reality. And so in this disinvested area of land where, again, African American people, because of forced migration, were forced to be in, at this point, then when it becomes profitable, then the corporate elite buy up huge swaths of this land under the guise of the public program urban renewal, for example. So in this process, Black and brown people are again pushed out of what at this point has become now their historic neighborhoods, so that wealthier white people can move in along with the businesses that cater to their income level. So thinking about this definition of gentrification, displacement, and the relationship to forced migration, how do you think gentrification and displacement happens? So we want you to put this in the chat. how does gentrification and displacement happen? And let's see what folks are saying. So $8 lattes, yep, makes everything better. Gentrification and manifest destiny share a common narrative. People of color on the land aren't using it right or using it productively. Absolutely. Housing that doesn't fit the neighborhood. In California, Costa Hawkins, unfettered land speculation. White people love quote unquote culture and want to steal it. Other folks, yeah. Tax breaks to wealthy developers. Yeah, big capital, buying up property and pushing out the poor and the working class folks. Over policing, a clear tie to the criminal justice system, predatory investors, neglecting neighborhood improvements until property goes down, right? And then these investors swoop in, yep. Neoliberal logic that cities have adopted to increase their tax base. Exactly. Okay, studies that justify gentrification, that's right. So there's a whole ideological machine that is created and kind of perpetuated through the universities that justify gentrification as a good thing for communities because it is profit generating. Okay, so lots of really good comments in the chat. So gentrification, just to kind of wrap this piece up, is, as we've been talking about, it's made possible by the profit-driven logic of capitalism. Gentrification struggles and anti-displacement struggles often center private property, right? Which again, we've been talking about the tying gentrification and displacement to over-policing. So cops, for example, are tasked with protecting property and not the people who live there. Right, so really good. Thank you for helping us to round out our definition of gentrification and displacement. Yep. Yeah. Paige is going to a little bit more of those connections between racial capitalism and over-policing and policing.
Right. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of really great comments in the chat and questions as well. And I appreciate you putting them in the chat. Just a heads up, we are going to send out the notes from this call, which includes all your comments in the chat. So please do keep in the conversation. So gentrification, right. To help us understand the connection between racial capitalism and policing, I actually found a Twitter thread on earlier this week by Boots Riley, who is an Oakland artist and activist. And it really helped kind of tie together policing and capitalism. So I'm just gonna use that as sort of a guide. And the link to the Twitter thread is also in the slides. So racist violence and police murder are inherent to capitalism, and it will be around until we get rid of capitalism. Because you can't have full employment under capitalism. Capitalism has to have a certain percentage of people to exist. There has to be an army of unemployed workers, right, who are willing to come in and take your job if you're not happy with it, right? There has to be some sort of competition. So the bigger the army of unemployed, the workers' supposed competition, then the lower the wages are. And the point is to keep the wages low as possible so you can make the most profit, right? If there was full employment, workers could tell the boss, I want $75 an hour or I'm out. And the boss couldn't replace them. They'd have to give in to the demands of the worker without much organizing needed. So capitalism needs an army of unemployed workers in order to exist. And what do you call an army of unemployed workers? You call them hungry. They need to eat. They don't have a job because capitalism needs them to be unemployed and desperate. And that army of unemployed workers isn't going to just let themselves or their families starve or be homeless, right? They're gonna go into a legal business. And all business, legal and illegal, uses violence to regulate itself, right? So if, you know, like during Prohibition, when liquor was illegal, if you rob the liquor dude, gangsters come after you. If you rob the liquor dude now, the police come after you, right? When weed was illegal, if you robbed the weed dude, his friends came after you. And if you rob the weed dude now, the police come after you. It's the same shit, right? It's the threat of violence. Illegal business doesn't have courts or the police to regulate it, so it has to regulate it itself, right? And as you see with police and legal business, regulating business takes physical force and violence. And so you can't have business without violence. So if you can't have business without violence and you can't have unemployment without illegal business, you can't have capitalism without unemployment. So you can't have capitalism without poverty, right? You can't have capitalism without unemployment. You can't have capitalism without what they call crime. And you can't have business, and you can't have capitalism without violence. So how does the ruling class tell the whole working class, who's the majority of people in this country and is largely white, that their poverty and their low wages is something that's built into the economic system? That Jeff Bezos and Michael Bloomberg are getting rich off of our poverty, relies on our poverty. They don't, right? They teach this lie, like we see in the slide, through media conglomerates that they own, right? Corporate media, that low wages, poverty, and violence is actually due to your bad decisions, right? You fucked up. You shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have done that. They teach us that the poverty that folks experience is something that can be fixed by just, you know, practicing how to balance a budget. But how do they get away with telling the whole working class that their low wages and poverty is built into capitalism without the working class trying to get rid of the ruling class, right? Like, how do they keep us quiet? They basically point to Black people and other people of color, and they say to the white working class, look at those savages, they're violent, their culture is lacking what they need to thrive in the system, they don't work hard, they have a weaker family structure than white people, etc. Pretty much the same argument that the colonizers used, right, to conquer indigenous peoples. So they'll say that's poverty, and Black people and other people of color and poverty because of their own doing, when in actuality, capitalism works fine and you can get rich if you just do it right, you know? And so they bolster the lie that Black neighborhoods have more crime and violence than white neighborhoods, but studies actually show that if you compare Black communities to white communities of the same income level, the violence and crime levels are the same, right? They're skewing those statistics by counting wealthy white neighborhoods. And the way they get the white working class to say, I'm not like those Black people, I am morally upstanding, I have some financial problems, it's just because I need to make a few adjustments, right? And so that's why you get white people in families who make $22,000 a year calling themselves middle class and aligning themselves with the ruling class, right? And so now that poverty and crime and violence that comes from it has all been defined as a personal individual problem, and furthermore, racially defined as derived from that culture, what is the role of the police? So if police are supposed to actually want to fight crime, then they would go to the source of the crime. That would be the ruling class, right? As we've shown, crime is inherent to capitalism. The ruling class sustains capitalism, they're the culprits, right? This would be the billionaires who cause the low wages that are poverty and crime that's necessitated by their actions. But the source of the crime is not in Black neighborhoods. It's on Fifth Avenue, it's in Bel Air, it's in Silicon Valley, right? But since the racist ideas of Black people and other people of color are necessitated by capitalism, then the job of the police in Black neighborhoods is functionally one of a combatant, right? They are there to fight against Black people. They are there to oppress. And it doesn't matter how nice the cop is or even what their conscious intentions are, right? This whole Blue Lives Matter, not all cops type of shit. The job of police is simply to lock people up for being involved in their own survival in an economic system that thrives off the fact that they are in poverty. And so the only way for cops to feel like they're doing their job is to subscribe to those racist notions about Black people and people of color, even if the cop is a person of color. So if we want to stop those things, we got to get rid of capitalism. And a movement that understands that also understands where our power lies. We've got to put people over profit. We have to heal our relationship to the land. And we can only do this through collective action together, right? We can only do this through collective action together. I saw a question in the chat earlier about, you know, how would we pay to cancel rent? How would we pay to cancel mortgages? The protesters in the streets currently have been calling to defund the police because we spend $100 billion a year on policing in this country. And it would cost significantly less than that to house every homeless person, right? To give everyone protection under the pandemic, to set up systems that would actually benefit us. So we've got to fight. We have our work cut out for us. We have centuries of oppression, but we also have centuries of resistance behind us, right? And it is possible if we are in this together. So that's our time. Thank you everybody for being here. I really wanna shout out Saki, Benishi, and Lisa for being my co-conspirators on this call. Thank you so much. Next week, we have part 5 of the series, which is called Power of the Renter Nation, How to Build a Tenant Union Part 1. So please come and join us. We're going to be talking about tenant unions and the role of the renter nation, and it's gonna be great. So thanks everybody. Look out for the recording and a follow-up email, and we'll see you next week.